I was last night. You're in Barcelona. You start dinner kind of late, and then it becomes later. Last night at about 1:15, my phone rang. I was starting to nod off, and of course it was my daughter. What did she want? She wanted to FaceTime about her math homework, and I said I can make all the time for that in the world, and I did. Next up, one of our two Patricias, Dr. Patti Fletcher. We prefer to call her Patti, those of us that know her. Strategic and Solution Marketing, Success Factors, SAP Labs. Patti advises corporate executives and board members from lean startups to Fortune 100s. As a futurist, Patti is currently working with SAP Success Factors to help change how the world thinks about bias, diversity, inclusion, and the role of HR in business. Patti, please. You're on.
Awesome. One of the first things we need to do is put railings over there for people with heels. So I'm not going to talk about toilets. Instead, I'm going to share a story with you. For as long as I can remember, I have been obsessed with my grandmother. That's her up there in the circle. And it's probably because I didn't know much about her. And what I did know is what my mother told me. I knew that she was born in 1915 in a place called Harput, Turkey, which no longer exists. I know that when she was 6 months old, she became an orphan. I know that at the age of 19, she emigrated to the United States and married my grandfather, who was 15 years older than her and not a very nice man, through an arranged marriage. After she died, my fascination with her only grew stronger, so I decided, at what was probably the worst and most inconvenient time of my life, to go back to school and get my PhD, so I could learn how to research like a scholar and find out more about who she was, the woman that she was. I was about halfway through researching my dissertation proposal, which was focused in on transformational leadership and innovation, when I took this class on feminist leadership theory. I grew up in a conservative family. I didn't really know what a feminist was, and I never self-identified as one. I thought it was a bad thing to do as a woman. So you can imagine my attitude when I went into that class. But that class, it ended up changing my life. It also ended up resulting in a change of dissertation, where I focused in on understanding the factors and characteristics of women who hold board of director positions in publicly held life sciences and technology businesses. At the time, there were about 15, and I think I talked to all of them. See, I found out two things in that class. The first is that the lack of women in business, in power, and in technology, the industry that I love, this was not a women's philanthropic issue. It also wasn't men's fault. It was a system problem, a system that was antiquated and no longer fit the context of our very diverse world. And the next thing was that, at the time there was a lot of, shh, don't talk about the differences between men and women, don't do that. Well, you know what? There are a lot of similarities between men and women, but there are also differences, and that's okay. To create an inclusive culture, we have to learn to celebrate differences. So on the first day of class, I was introduced to this lady and her work. This is Dr. Carol Gilligan. Many credit her for being the founder of feminist leadership theory. Up until Gilligan's work, there was this common understanding of moral development, right? How value-based decisions are made. Here's Gilligan's problem with it. Every research participant, white male. I think the world is filled with more than white men. So she did that same research, but this time, she used women. And guess what she found? She found one of the biggest differences that define why we have a problem when it comes to the representation of women in business. And that is this. Men are linear in their decision making. Very easily go from A to B. They value rules, they value justice. Women, we're relational in our decision making. We tend to think about the implications of a decision and the people that it will impact. Gilligan was not making a judgment call. She was saying, we kind of need both because we kind of do. At about this time, I started learning more about my grandmother. That picture came during this time. And here's what I found out. My grandmother, her parents didn't just die, they were killed. They were murdered in the Armenian genocide. And that picture, turns out my grandmother was a refugee. I had no idea. You see, I'm really lucky. I'm a white woman who was born in 1969 America. Yes, my parents were working class, no business connections, just like, quite frankly, the women I studied. But because of the color of my skin, the place I was born and where I was born, I had a fighting chance. My grandmother, because of when she was born, where she was born, the gender she was born, the religion she was born into, the culture her family practiced, she had no power in her own life. She had no equity for her destiny. And this was at odds with the women who I got to study and meet. These women didn't wait to be empowered. They empowered themselves, and they used that power to change the industry. Love that t-shirt. So that's our head of product, by the way, who's heading our diversity and inclusion work. So I finished my PhD, and you can imagine, right? First in the family to get a doctorate. I was very, very proud, and I could not wait to share with the world everything that I had learned. One of the first things I got to do was facilitate a panel at a technology conference. So we heard the numbers from this conference. At that conference, there were about 18% women. And the panel was to talk about how do we get more women. I was excited, it was gonna be awesome, and we were gonna change the world. Except, it wasn't awesome, and we didn't change the world. In the days that, well, all right, the truth is half the room walked out. And in the days that followed, there were angry blogs written about me in my inbox. It was filled with hate mail. I took a few days to lick my wounds, couldn't quite believe what happened. And at the encouragement of one of my wiser colleagues, I decided to reach out to some of my harshest critics. And here's what I found out. I found out that I screwed up. You see, remember, the problem with diversity and inclusion, it's not a man's problem. It's a system problem, and I made it about the men. And the men, they felt blamed and they felt shamed. That the system that helped them to thrive was the same system that kept me as the only woman constantly in the room. I didn't practice what I had learned, and instead of creating that all-important inclusive culture of and that Gilligan talked about, I created that exclusive culture of or. Everyone I have spoken with on this topic, and it's been years, comes to it from a personal journey. Everybody. Mine was a perfect storm of learning about my grandmother. It was a perfect storm of the dissertation research, and quite frankly, of that panel. For the men who I spoke with, their personal catalyst for change came when they thought, oh my God, my daughters will not have the same opportunities as my sons. Transformation comes when we get awareness that something has to change, and then that personal desire to be part of that change. But it's not enough. What we heard this morning is it takes action. Elizabeth Kellen from Cranfield University, I always put an S in there by mistake, she did this research a few years ago. And what she found is that the glass ceiling wasn't where I put it at my research. It wasn't most prominent there. It was actually at the middle manager layer. This is significant. It's significant because this is where the majority of the population is managed. It's also significant because when we look at the research, the reason that people stay or leave a company is their direct manager. So if we think about technology, what does that tell us? Women leave at twice the rate of men, and this is costly. It costs companies 200% to replace each woman that walks out the door. So what do? I learned from the conference that when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. I learned from my transformational leadership studies something incredibly important that we all must understand about this topic. People do not change when you tell them to. They change when you enable them to. Really important. So how do we enable this, considering the fact that 150 different unconscious biases are at work in our brain at any given time? The word unconscious is kind of important, right? This is stuff we don't question. It'd be like someone saying, Patty, how do you breathe? I don't know, in and out, right? I'm not going to question if it's efficient. It's just what I do. So thinking about that and thinking about the fact that, oh my gosh, technology can be a catalyst for change, and SAP understanding that as a founder of the enterprise technology industry, which changed the way businesses are run, that if you don't like the world you live in, you create a new one. Let's create a diverse and inclusive company. Let's do it for ourselves, and let's enable our customers to do it as well. 74% of the world's economy runs on SAP software. If not us, then who? So, 150 different unconscious biases at work. How do we enable change? We identified the 9 key decisions that determine if you will hinder or harness all the best and available talent, because that's what we're talking about when we are talking about diversity and inclusion. Technology is a catalyst for that cultural change, a catalyst without the blame and shame. Let me give you a little bit of an idea of that. Most people, when they start using technology for this topic, what do? Analytics, right? They figure out we have a problem. At this level, we have 10% women. At this level, we have 20%. We know that women leave in this line of business and not that. That's important. But stopping there, which a lot of folks do, is the equivalent of saying, I really want to lose some weight. I think I'll buy a scale. I'm going to weigh myself every week, but I'm not going to change how I live my life. I'm going to eat the same old stuff, and I'm probably not going to work out very much. What do you think is going to happen at that scale? Exactly, not much. So what we need to do then is enable different behavior. How about we look at our structures? We just heard about an executive who has a flex schedule, right? Works 4 days a week, because you see, it's not just about promoting women, advocating for women. It's about understanding that their road from start to finish looks a lot different than his road from start to finish. That's what equity is about. Not just giving me the opportunity to succeed, but giving the environment and the tools to succeed based on the bigger context of my life. Now let's talk about the human capital management value chain. One of the beliefs that we have is that diversity and inclusion is about harnessing all the best and available talent. And so what that means is, it is not in addition to how you do, it's not in addition to human capital management applications, it's how you do human capital management. So think about how machine learning and artificial intelligence can start helping us to identify bias and to eradicate bias. How about job descriptions? We talked about it a little bit earlier. We all write job descriptions. We probably don't think much about it as hiring managers, right? Those middle manager folks. What about if machine learning was able to detect those words that might be very attractive for a nurse to be female, very unattractive for a woman to apply for a developer job? And what if we didn't stop there? What if the machine kept getting smarter and smarter and smarter? Because remember, this is harnessing all the best and available talent for business outcomes, not just because this is a nice thing to do. So what about with the combination of data, we start to understand the quality of hires? We know if we have this type of job description, we get this type of recruit, we hire them into our organization, we get this kind of quality hire, time to value, business impact. Isn't that incredible? Right? That's incredible. That changes everything. And let's not just stop at recruiting. What about performance reviews? Research shows that faces, names, all of those things trigger our unconscious bias. What about if our systems were smart enough to do faceless, nameless comparisons of my performance based on the impact? That then changes things like who gets on high potential lists, who gets what bonuses, who gets what raises. This is critical. And with that information, chief diversity officers, human capital management officers, they then know where to invest money in training up managers and training up the workforce, and where they don't need to. No blame, no shame, just leveling the playing field. You know, I told you that I come from a pretty traditional family. I do. My father is a real meat and potatoes kind of guy, grew up in the 1950s. And he had 3 daughters, poor guy. And he used to tease my sisters and I by saying, if you women wanted equal rights, you can open your own damn doors. And you know, I roll my eyes like any good daughter, but I have to say thanks to him, because he gave me a different perspective on this topic. You see, I don't think it's about waiting for the executive ranks to smash those glass ceilings. They should be doing that, but I shouldn't have to wait for it. Look at me. I'm the granddaughter of a refugee, and I know that my influence comes from this personal desire to make change. With technology, with passion, with awareness, we all have the opportunity not just to open the doors like those women who I studied, but to keep them open so that all talent, regardless of gender, race, culture, differently abled, can walk on through. And then, and only then, can we all thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Patti. We were all watching. No. Yeah, she did it. She got there. I wasn't going to say anything until you navigated that. But thank you. Yeah, no. You gave us a lot to think about. And thank you also for sharing the personal journey piece. I'm sure that's not easy, but you do it, and it's helpful for the men and the women and all of that. So thanks for that. Most important person in my life was my grandmother, and I knew her quite well. And she had a much different story, but was the most impactful person in my life, still to this day. Probably my daughter will supersede that eventually.